We're not alone, at least not in the Pokémon Universe. We've seen alien Pokémon, from harmless-looking creatures like Clefairy to planetary threats like Deoxys. However, there are many other creatures that originate from different timelines and parallel universes. In this Iceberg, we'll explore the secrets, mysteries, lore, Pokédex entries and more surrounding alien and interdimensional Pokémon across the Pokémon multiverse. Welcome to the out-of-this-world Pokémon Iceberg.
Say my name, EisenBerg. You're goddamn right.
Deoxys and the Most Deep Space Center. The Most Deep Space Center could have been more than just a building. I remember rumors of an alien Pokémon back in 2003 in Ruby and Sapphire and thought it must have something to do with the Space Center and the rocket. Now we know that there were never plans to visit space in Gen 3, but there are a couple of videos on YouTube that show the main character visiting the moon and catching Deoxys or Jirachi. In fact, now that I think about it, it would have been an awesome event if we could have caught Deoxys in Pokémon Emerald by going into space instead of visiting Bird Island. Thankfully, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire gave us the opportunity to go to space and catch Deoxys, even though we used Rayquaza instead of a rocket to achieve our goal. Meteor Falls and Mount Moon. Meteor Falls is a large cave north of Rosboro City, and it's one of my favorite places in the Pokémon world, especially the Ruby and Sapphire version because in Emerald they changed the cave's color from golden to brown. The music feels magical, and I recall exploring the place while looking for a Bagon, a Pokémon that only appears in a very specific area inside the cave. This place exists because 2000 years prior to the events of Pokémon Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Hoenn was hit by a meteor that gave birth to this place that would later be home of the Draconid people, a tribe that worships Rayquaza after it saved the world from Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre 1000 years before Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. We can find a couple of alien Pokémon like Lunaton and Solrock, as well as Jigglypuff outside this large cave. Another similar place is Mount Moon, not because it was formed by a meteorite impact, but because it's home to a Pokémon said to have come from the moon, Clefairy. I don't know what it is about Mount Moon, but I just love the general vibe I get from it. It's creepy and the music is actually cool but kind of scary, especially for a child like myself in the late 90s. Clefairy are more advanced than humans. I know we've never seen anything like this in the games, but the anime had shown what Clefairy are capable of. In the episode Clefairy Tales, we see a group of Clefairy stealing different objects to repair their spacecraft. In the episode Wish Upon a Star Shape, we see the same group of Clefairy crash landing. I guess they still have to perfect space travel, but it's undeniable that this species of Pokémon is capable of developing technology that, judging from what we've seen in the anime, surpasses that of the human species. If Clefairy can do this, I can only imagine what a creature with an IQ of 5000 like Alakazam would be capable of. Giant Chasm. The giant chasm in the Unova region is actually a massive impact crater said to have been formed by a meteorite containing Kyurem. According to legend, the people from Lacunosa town suffered from cold winds coming from the impact site, and even some inhabitants began disappearing due to the monster's presence in the surroundings. As I said in my black and white Iceberg, there's a contradiction regarding Kyurem. On one hand, you have Kyurem arriving on a meteorite, and on the other, a complete dragon that split into three. If the original dragon was already on Earth, it's very unlikely that Kyurem arrived on a meteorite. Both things can't be true at the same time, and since there's evidence that supports Kyurem arriving on that meteorite, I'm inclined to believe that the original dragon might only be a legend. In fact, we can find a lot of Pokémon said to have come from outer space, such as Lunaton, Solrock, and Clefairy. Talking about the giant chasm and the Lacunosa legend, these are partially based on a real-life event known as the Tunguska event, a cataclysm that took place in Siberia in June 30th, 1908, and that devastated an area of around 2,000 square kilometers. Southern Island Message. The southern island is located, as its name implies, in the south of the Hoenn region, nothing out of this world. However, once we catch or defeat Latios or Latias, we get a message if we interact with the crystal in the middle of the forest that reads the following: "All dreams are but another reality. Never forget." I know it's a short message, but it's always captivated me and made me wonder what it really means and why such words are engraved in that object. I like to think about dreams as slices of alternate realities we can travel to and experience different versions of ourselves somewhere else. Letter in a Bottle in Kalai Bay. This is one of my favorite entries because there's so much mystery behind this obscure story. In Pokémon Sun and Moon, if we go to Kalai Bay, we'll find a letter in a bottle that reads the following: "To the person who finds this letter. If you're reading this letter, please find a way to deliver it to my little sister. She lives in Iki Town on Mele Mele Island. This place where I am now is really weird and is unbelievable, but all of the people here have been really nice, so I'm okay. I hope I'll see you again someday. Be safe. Your big brother." When you go to Iki Town, you'll notice that a letter was written several decades ago because the sister the person in the letter is referring to is now an old lady. It's possible that back then, Cosmog used an ultra wormhole to enter Alola, and maybe these portals don't evaporate right away, but remain active for some time. When this young boy was pulled into the portal, he ended up in an unknown dimension. Some people theorize that he ended up in the Ultra Megalopolis because the only place with people beyond the Ultra space we know of are those belonging to the Ultra Recon squad. Sadly, the only way we know about him is because of that letter. While he was able to deliver the letter to Alola, he couldn't get himself back home, although it's nice to know that the inhabitants of that world are nice to him. Spaceman. In the Alola games, after becoming the champion, the player will come across a man suffering from amnesia in the middle of Hyena Desert. If the player shows him a Solrock in the Sun games or Lunatone in the Moon games, he'll mention that he encountered the Pokémon shown to him 3 decades earlier, and that the star pulses it bestow upon him have been passed down to a group of wonderful men. If whatever that means is already strange, what happens next is even crazier. After giving a Sun or Moon stone to the player, he bids farewell, stating that he finally knows how to go home, and then proceeds to ascend into the sky. This is, without a doubt, one of the strangest occurrences in a Pokémon game. Jigglypuff can be found near impact sites. Compared to Clefairy, Jigglypuff's alien origin isn't that clear, but it's still considered to be a Pokémon from the Moon. Something I wasn't aware of is that, while it doesn't appear in places where Clefairy does like Mount Moon, it can be found on Route 3, close to the entrance of Mount Moon. In fact, it's true that Jigglypuff can be found near impact sites, given that it also appears outside of Meteor Falls. The Pokémon Company acknowledges Jigglypuff's alien origin when the Enigma Week event for Pokémon Go took place, focusing on extraterrestrial Pokémon such as Clefairy, Staryu and Lunatone, for example. Fallers. Faller is a term used to describe any person who has been displaced into another time or universe after passing through an ultra wormhole. The first Faller that we know of is Looker, an international police officer that debuted in Pokémon Platinum. He's found in the battle resort in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire on the shore, and without any recollection of how he ended up there. Annabelle, one of the frontier brains in Pokémon Emerald, is another Faller that experienced a similar event to Looker 10 years prior to the events of Pokémon Sun and Moon. In spite of her amnesia, she does recall something about her being a powerful trainer from the Hoenn region who used to protect a tower. She joined the International Police shortly after, and even became Looker's superior in the UB Task Force, a secret division of the International Police that deals with Ultra Beasts. Nobody really knows how these characters ended up in a different timeline, but the same happened to Ingo, one of the leaders of the battle subway in the Unova region, except that nobody knows if he only traveled back in time, or besides that, he ended up in a completely different timeline. Mega Evolution doesn't exist in all timelines. When we're at the Mos Deep Space Center with Zinnia in the Delta episode in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we indirectly find out that the remakes of the Gen 3 main series games aren't just retellings of their events, but actual parallel universes. According to her, Zinnia's ancestors witnessed the existence of another Hoenn region where it's possible that Mega Evolution doesn't exist. This means that games previous to X and Y belong to a universe where the ultimate weapon was never activated. This explanation was given because the Mos Deep Space Center came up with a device to deflect the meteorite to another dimension that would potentially lead to the end of that world, that place being the Hoenn region of Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald. Thankfully, with the help of Mega Rayquaza, Brendan or May were capable of stopping the apocalypse for their own world and that of the Gen 3 games. I'm happy about it because I don't know what I would do without Pokémon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald. The Sinjar Ruins exist in a pocket dimension. While the Sinjar Ruins appear to be a physical place between the Johto and Sinnoh regions, in the Pokémon Adventures manga, this place actually exists in a pocket dimension that connects both regions. It is said that if something were to happen to the Sinjar Ruins, given its connection to Johto and Sinnoh, both regions would be destroyed. Now that I think about it, the only way to access the Sinjar Ruins in Heart Gold and Soul Silver is through entering the Ruins of Ulf with a Hall of Origin Arceus, meaning that you actually don't seem to reach that place yourself, but with the powers of the god Pokémon. Porygon-Z was made to travel to alien dimensions. Poor Porygon will forever remain infamous for the Pokémon Shock incident, which sent around 700 Japanese children to the hospital and led to its ban from the anime. I'm sure Porygon would have had a lot of potential in the anime if we take into account some of its Pokédex entries, including those of its evolutions. According to its red and blue Pokédex entry, it's capable of moving freely in cyberspace. Porygon 2 is obviously an upgraded version of its pre-evolution, and as such, besides being able to move freely in cyberspace, it was also made for space exploration. However, the most interesting is Porygon-Z because it goes a step further, or at least that was its purpose. If we read its Heart Gold and Soul Silver Pokédex entry, we'll find out that Porygon-Z's programming was modified to enable it to travel to alien dimensions. Nonetheless, apparently there's an error in its code, as it's not yet capable of doing it, and some other entries state that it also behaves oddly. Will we ever see this Pokémon's true potential realized? I'm sure the Aether Foundation could make great use of it to explore other dimensions. Elgyem and the Roswell incident. We know that Unova is based off of the USA. As such, there are plenty of references to American culture. One of them is the Pokémon Elgyem and its background. According to its Pokémon White Pokédex entry, this Pokémon had never been seen until it appeared from far in the desert 50 years ago. This is a clear reference to the Roswell incident that allegedly occurred on July 2nd, 1947 near Roswell, New Mexico. Some accounts say that a flying saucer crashed on the desert and that bodies from unknown entities were retrieved as well as their technology in order to learn more about it and possibly reverse engineer it. Elgyem's Black 2 and White 2 Pokédex entry reinforces the reference to the Roswell incident by saying that rumors of its origin are linked to a UFO crash site in the desert 50 years ago, more or less at the time when the Roswell incident supposedly took place. As if aliens weren't scary enough, according to its Pokémon Sword Pokédex entry, if this Pokémon stands near a TV, strange scenery that appears to be from its home will show on the screen. I might be wrong, but I think this was similar to the plot of an episode from an old series. I'm not sure if it was the Twilight Zone or something like that, but I recall having watched an episode where somebody builds an antenna to improve his TV signal, so powerful that it transmits alien TV shows. If somebody knows what I'm talking about, please let me know in the comments section. Beheeyem abduct Dubwool. Beheeyem's Pokédex entry may not be as interesting as Elgyem's, but let's take a look at a couple of its entries. Its Pokemon Sword Pokédex entry states that whenever this Pokemon visits a farm, Dubwool mysteriously disappears. Also, in its Shield entry, it says that it's sometimes found drifting above wheat fields. These two entries refer to cattle that have supposedly been abducted or found without a single drop of blood, and to the crop circles with alien symbols that have appeared all around the world. Paradox Pokémon. Paradox Pokémon are very interesting. Not only are we talking about Pokémon from the past or the future, but from the distant past and future. Even before AI Sada or Turo developed the time machine to access different eras, these Pokémon had already been seen 200 years prior to the events of Scarlet and Violet. Heath, a member of the Area Zero expedition, recalled coming across a Pokémon similar to a Donphan that we now know as Great Tusks or Iron Threads. Given that Terrapagos is known for altering timelines and bringing objects or people from different times to the present, it's almost a fact that this Pokémon was responsible for the appearance of Paradox Pokémon hundreds of years before a time machine was created. The past is fascinating because, to some extent, we have an idea of what it was. However, the future, at least personally, is even more interesting because there's nothing that can predict what will happen, especially if we're talking about millions or even billions of years into the future. Past Paradox Pokémon are more similar to their present counterparts because they're biological creatures. Nonetheless, future Paradox Pokémon appear to be completely artificial. As I mentioned in my Scarlet and Violet Iceberg, it's quite possible that same as humans may become cyborgs, Pokémon also had to go through something similar in order to be more efficient or to survive an environment that a regular organic creature wouldn't be able to. Even though the Gen 9 Pokémon games aren't exactly my cup of tea, I would definitely love to explore the distant past, but even more the distant future and see how the Pokémon world looks like. Hoopa can access different worlds and timelines. Hoopa reminds me a bit of Celebi, but I think Hoopa is more broken because, while Celebi can travel to the past and future of the same timeline, apparently Hoopa has access to alternate dimensions. How can this Pokémon summon a shiny Rayquaza? Well, by accessing a universe where that Rayquaza exists. Now that I think about it, if Hoopa is able to access other realities, I guess it's possible it could reach worlds where Pokémon don't even exist, or took a slightly different evolutionary path. I don't think there's anything preventing Hoopa from traveling back and forth in time, same as Celebi, but what do you think? The XY Files. Judging by the fact that Legends ZA never confirmed anything about this whole theory, we may never know if it was actually true, but here's the story. After a war broke out on Earth, thousands of years prior to the events of Pokémon X and Y, a race of aliens decided to put a stop to the human race by destroying the planet. For some reason, AZ, a member of this race, crash lands on Earth before carrying out his mission. On the planet, he befriends a Floette that causes him to have a change of heart. Instead of activating the flower-like device that would have destroyed Earth, he gifts it to his new friend and decides to betray his race by living on planet Earth. Many years after, Team Flare, the clan that AZ belonged to, descended on Earth to find and punish AZ for not carrying out his original mission. In fact, due to not being in possession of the ultimate weapon AZ took with him, Team Flare decides to look for Xerneas and Yveltal, the only other source of power that could destroy planet Earth. It's also discovered that all fairy Pokémon have an alien origin, more specifically from the moon, and that Diantha, who back then supposedly had Valerie's appearance, was the leader of this extraterrestrial Pokémon. Judging by Valerie's big dark eyes, I can see some resemblance between them and those of a typical grey alien. What I'm telling you was posted on 4chan by a user by the name of XY Cider. Although the story is certainly more interesting than what we ended up with in Pokémon X and Y, I think this leak is fake, mainly because when the Giga Leak and Terra Leak took place, there was no evidence that even closely resembled some of the elements described in this entry. My last hope to believe in this theory was Legends ZA, but considering that we now know it has nothing to do with aliens, we can say that most likely this leak was nothing more than a fan fiction. Pokémon games from a different universe. Beta content is much more than just early versions of the games we ended up with. I see them as products that people from different universes or timelines might have gotten to experience. On one hand, I'm grateful that we got amazing games like Gold, Silver and Crystal and their remakes, but part of me still wonders what Pokémon might have looked like if Game Freak had chosen to release some of the content we saw in the Nintendo Space World 97 demo, including Pokémon like Kurusu or Honoguma. I guess these prototypes hit a bit different because, unlike any other beta content, these prototypes feel like they were basically ready to launch, at least in terms of the quality of the Gen 1 games. If any leak ever came close to matching the amount of data uncovered in the Space World prototypes, it was the Ruby and Sapphire leak. If you watch my Gen 3 Pokémon Anomalies Iceberg, you'll know that there were some amazing designs for Pokémon that never saw the light of day. I remember I read an article somewhere, maybe from an old magazine, that said that Game Freak was thinking about giving Pokémon an additional move slot, but that the game would have been kind of broken, so they decided against it. Changes like this, from small to big decisions, have shaped the way we experience Pokémon, and who knows what awaits in years to come. Abandoned Pokémon in distant worlds. I spoke about this in my Pokémon Sun and Moon Iceberg. As we travel through Ultra Space, we come across many Ultra wormholes that lead to very distant worlds, home to Pokémon that originate on Earth, such as Swellow or Medicham. This raises a question: how is it that a Pokémon from Earth ended up on a planet thousands of light years away? I think most of you know what a light year is, but for those who don't, a light year is simply the distance light travels in a vacuum over the span of 1 year. Since light travels at 300,000 kilometers per second, a light year equals 9,460,730,472,580 kilometers. When we ride Lunala or Solgaleo, we can make it to worlds as far as 7,000 light years from Earth, but how can a wild Pokémon make it there on their own? While the Ether Foundation's goal is to protect Pokémon, we've seen its president Lusamine carrying out questionable experiments, such as cryogenizing Pokémon to preserve them for all eternity. Professor Mon, Lusamine's husband, conducted experiments involving ultra wormholes, which ultimately led to his disappearance from Alola. This makes me wonder if, just like him, the wild Pokémon we find in those distant worlds fell into ultra wormholes opened by the Ether Foundation. It's very ominous to think that people or Pokémon may have ended up in those alien worlds, most likely without any way to return home, destined to die alone in a distant corner of the universe. This scenario makes me think of an obscure game I used to play as a child and that I love, Another World, or Out of This World as it's known in America. Basically, it's about a scientist who carries out experiments with a particle accelerator, but one stormy night, a lightning bolt strikes his laboratory while he's running the machine, and he accidentally ends up in an alien world where he has to survive on his own for the most part. It's a short old game, but I can always go back to it. The moon landing is canon. July 20, 1969, the first lunar landing. Not only are these the words of an NPC at the Peter Museum, but also a fact of our real world because that's the exact date when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped on the moon. This natural satellite of planet Earth, at least in the Pokémon universe, appears to be home to Clefairy, something that doesn't really make a lot of sense because if moonstones are pieces of the moon and they make Clefairy evolve into Clefable, wouldn't all the moon's population be Clefable or Clefa? Well, maybe certain parts of the moon's surface are special. Talking about the moon and parallel worlds, I can't avoid thinking about the "in event of moon disaster" speech, a contingency speech prepared for President Nixon in case Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were stranded on the moon. It reads the following: "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there's no hope for their recovery, but they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice sacrifice. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one. In their sacrifice, they bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same, but our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. Man's search will not be denied, but these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. I know this isn't quite Pokemon related, but when am I gonna have the chance to speak about it in this channel? Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee's timeline is a complete mess. Saying that the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee timeline is a mess is an understatement. Most of you know the story of Red and Blue. A Pokemon trainer called Red travels the Kanto region, beats the 8 gyms, disbands a criminal organization known as Team Rocket by defeating Giovanni, and becomes the Pokemon champion after defeating the Elite Four and his rival from Pallet Town, Blue. Now, what happens in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is strange because we see many out-of-place events happening. Somehow, Chase and Trace are experiencing almost the exact same events that Red and Blue did back when they were children wanting to become Pokemon champions. For example, if Red disbanded Team Rocket after defeating Giovanni, how is it that Giovanni is back as if Red hadn't gone through Kanto at all? This wouldn't be a problem if Red and Blue didn't appear in the game, but they do. If Trace is doing virtually the same as Red when he was younger, what is it that Red went through in his journey across the Kanto region? To make sense of it, Red and Blue must have experienced completely different events, but whatever those were goes completely unexplained. On top of everything, we come across Green in Cerulean Cave. Yes, Green, not to be confused with Leaf. Leaf is the female protagonist in Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, so it would have made more sense to find her instead of Green, a character that was exclusive to the manga. All in all, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee is a mix between the adventures of Red and Blue, but experienced by another protagonist, Pokemon Yellow, due to the starters being Pikachu and Eevee, and the appearance of Jessie and James, the Pokemon Adventures manga, but only because Green shows up in Cerulean Cave, Pokemon Go because of the catching mechanics, and the timeline where Mega Evolution exists. I guess Celebi and Dialga were having a lot of fun in the past. Alien cover-up in the Pokemon world. While Pokemon such as Clefairy are believed to have come from outer space, Deoxys is the only, or at least one of the few Pokemon confirmed to be extraterrestrial. Nonetheless, before becoming a Pokemon, this creature was nothing more than a virus that arrived on Earth from outer space. Once it was exposed to a laser beam of unknown origin, it transformed into the Deoxys we're familiar with. It is currently unknown who experimented on this virus, or whether the laser beam granted it the ability to change forms, or if that ability was already encoded in its DNA before becoming a Pokemon. In the Pokemon Generations anime, we see Gabby and Tai infiltrate the Mos Deep Space Center to steal footage of the Meteor's destruction and uncover how the event truly unfolded. They discover that Mega Rayquaza and a child were responsible for saving the world from a meteorite containing an alien creature, one the trainer battled and captured unbeknownst to the public. After downloading the footage onto a USB drive, they're intercepted by a scientist and the security staff, but manage to escape with the evidence. The scientist states that it's too soon for the world to know that information. This mirrors the conspiracy theory that governments conceal the existence of alien life. It makes sense that, within the context of this conspiracy theory, the existence of extraterrestrial life would be hidden due to the unforeseen impact it could have on society, economics, religion, philosophy, and many other aspects of our world. If the conspiracy is real, I guess the Pokemon world is not that different from ours. Claydol's scary origin. Claydol has a scary origin because, while most of its Pokédex entries say that it was made as a clay figurine that came to life from exposure to a mysterious ray of light, its Ultramoon Pokédex entry states something disturbing that no other Pokédex talks about. It reads the following: The ancient people who made it apparently modeled it after something that descended from the sky. If I had seen something with multiple eyes descending from the sky in ancient times that wasn't a Pokémon, I'm sure I would have been terrified. What that creature was or what it did when it was seen by ancient people remains a complete mystery. Thank you so much for watching. If your favorite Pokemon is Magikarp, I recommend checking out my Iceberg on this useless Pokemon. If you want something less pathetic, you can also watch my Mewtwo Iceberg or just go to my channel and check out the many Pokemon related icebergs available for you. If you're interested in more video game icebergs, don't forget to subscribe to the EisenBerg Experience channel. Recently I uploaded an iceberg on Resident Evil Requiem, but you can also find Nintendo related games like Super Mario 64. See you in the next one.